I caught my 17-year-old son sneaking out at 2 a.m. I followed him to our neighbor's house. What I discovered wasn't the danger I imagined, it was something far worse. Something that would send our neighbor to prison. Hello, my dear listeners. Thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. I always find it fascinating to read which cities and countries you're listening from, and if you've lived through something like this, so don't hesitate to write a comment. Now please get comfortable. Happy listening. Let me tell you how it started. My name is Miriam Ashford. I'm 45 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've been a single mother to my son Ethan. His father left when Ethan was 5, just walked out one day and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. So it's been just the two of us. Me working as a freelance graphic designer from our small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Ethan growing from a confused little boy into a remarkable young man, and he was remarkable. 17 years old, a senior in high school, with straight A's and the acceptance letter to the state university for pre-med. He volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. He helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. He was kind, thoughtful, responsible. He was everything I'd hoped he'd become despite growing up without a father, which is why I noticed immediately when something changed. It started about 3 weeks ago, in late October. Ethan came home from school looking exhausted. Not the normal tired of a teenager with too much homework and early morning classes. This was different. Deep, bone-tired exhaustion that made him move like someone decades older. Long day? I asked as he dropped his backpack by the door. Yeah, he rubbed his eyes. Just a lot going on. Want to talk about it? Not really. I'm just going to grab a snack and do homework. He disappeared into his room. I told myself it was normal. He was 17. Teenagers needed space, privacy, independence, but the exhaustion continued. Every day he came home looking more worn out. His eyes had dark circles. His usually careful appearance became sloppy. Wrinkled shirts, uncombed hair, sometimes the same clothes 2 days in a row. His grades started slipping. My straight-A son brought home a C on a chemistry test, then a D on a history paper. Ethan, what's going on? I asked one evening over dinner. This isn't like you. I'm fine, Mom. Just stressed about college applications. Is there something else? Something you're not telling me? His expression closed off. No, I'm just tired. Can we drop it? I wanted to push, wanted to demand answers. But I also remembered being 17, remembered hating when my own mother interrogated me. So I backed off. That was my first mistake. The weird phone calls started around the same time. Ethan's phone would ring at odd hours, during dinner, late in the evening, early in the morning before school. He'd glance at the screen, his face tightening with something I couldn't read, then step outside to take the call. Who keeps calling you? I asked after the third time in one evening. Just a friend. School stuff. At 9 o'clock at night? It's a group project, Mom. We're coordinating schedules. The lie was smooth, almost believable. But I'd been his mother for 17 years. I knew when he wasn't telling me the truth. Then came the night everything changed. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of our front door clicking shut. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it. But then I heard footsteps on our front walkway, careful and quiet, trying not to make noise. I got out of bed and moved to the window. Our street was dark except for the occasional streetlight. And there, walking down our driveway in jeans and a dark hoodie, was Ethan. My heart stopped. At 2 a.m., my 17-year-old son was sneaking out of our house. Every terrible possibility crashed through my mind at once. Was he meeting friends? Going to a party? Meeting a girl? Something worse? I grabbed my phone, threw on a jacket over my pajamas, and slipped on shoes. By the time I got outside, Ethan was already halfway down the block, moving quickly but not running. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Our neighborhood was silent. Houses dark, no cars on the street. Just me following my son through the night, terrified of what I was about to discover. Ethan turned left at the end of our block, then right onto Maple Street. I knew where he was going before he got there. Derek Lowry's house. Our neighbor, the single father who lived 4 houses down with his elderly mother. I'd met Derek a few times over the years. He was 38, worked night shifts as a warehouse supervisor, and seemed like a decent guy. His mother Barbara had moved in with him about 5 years ago after her husband died. She was in her early 70s. And I'd heard through neighborhood gossip that she had dementia. Derek always seemed stressed when I saw him. tired, overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for his mother while working full-time, and now my son was sneaking into his house at 2 a.m. I watched from behind a car parked across the street as Ethan walked up to Derek's side door and knocked quietly. The door opened immediately. Derek must have been waiting, and Ethan slipped inside. I stood there in the darkness, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. What was happening? Why was my son here? What was Derek Lowry doing with my 17-year-old at 2 a.m.? I moved closer to the house, staying in the shadows, trying to see through the windows. Most were dark, but I could see light coming from what I knew was the living room. I crept around to the side of the house where the living room windows faced the street. The curtains were partially open, and through the gap I could see inside. What I saw made me freeze. Ethan was sitting on the couch next to an elderly woman, Barbara, Derek's mother. She was wearing a nightgown, her white hair messy, her expression confused. Ethan was talking to her quietly, holding her hand, showing her something on his phone. And then, as I watched, Barbara started crying. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders and let her lean against him. He was rubbing her back the way you'd comfort a small child, speaking to her in that same quiet, gentle voice. Derek was nowhere in sight. I stood there for 20 minutes, watching my son care for this elderly woman with dementia, watching him get her a glass of water, help her stand up and walk slowly down the hallway, come back alone and sit on the couch, his head in his hands, looking exhausted, and suddenly all the pieces clicked into place. The exhaustion, the late-night phone calls, the slipping grades, the secrecy. Ethan had been sneaking out at night to help take care of Barbara Lowry while Derek was at work. My first emotion was relief so powerful it made my knees weak. He wasn't doing anything dangerous. He wasn't in trouble. He was being kind, compassionate, exactly the person I'd raised him to be. My second emotion was confusion. Why hadn't he told me? Why the secrecy? And my third emotion, the one that came slowly but settled in deep, was suspicion. Because something about this situation didn't add up. Derek Lowry worked night shifts. That much was true. But Derek Lowry also drove a brand new BMW. He wore expensive watches. I'd seen him coming home from work in designer clothes. If Derek could afford a BMW and Rolex watches, why couldn't he afford proper care for his mother? Why was he relying on my 17-year-old son to provide overnight supervision for a woman with dementia? I stood in the darkness outside Derek Lowry's house, watching my son care for a vulnerable elderly woman, and felt the first cold finger of real fear touch my spine. Something was very wrong here, and I was going to find out what. I didn't confront Ethan that morning when he came home at 5:30 a.m. His face gray with exhaustion, just in time to shower and get ready for school. I pretended to be asleep when I heard him come in. Listened to him move quietly through the house, trying not to wake me. And when he left for school at 7, I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, acting like everything was normal. Morning, honey. Want some breakfast? Not hungry, Mom. I'll grab something at school. He was out the door before I could say anything else. I waited until 8, then called my best friend Isabel Chang. Isabel was a nurse at County General, but more importantly, she had connections in the medical community and access to resources I didn't. Izzy, I need your help with something. Can you look up a patient for me? Miriam, you know I can't just... It's important. Really important. And it's not for anything illegal, I promise. She sighed. What do you need? Barbara Lowry. She's in her 70s, lives on my street, has dementia. I need to know if she's receiving proper medical care. If anyone's filed elder care paperwork for her. Anything you can find. Why? What's going on? I'll explain later. Can you just look? Give me until lunch. I'll call you back. While I waited, I did my own research. I pulled up Derek Lowry's social media profiles, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. What I found made my stomach turn. Derek's Instagram was a showcase of his lifestyle. Photos of expensive dinners at high-end restaurants, weekend trips to Vegas and Miami, new electronics, a massive TV, top-of-the-line laptop, the latest iPhone. His BMW featured prominently in his photos, always freshly detailed, always perfect, and not once, not in 3 years of photos, was there a single picture of his mother. Not one photo of Barbara. Not one mention of her in his captions. Nothing acknowledging that he was a caregiver for an elderly woman with dementia. It was as if she didn't exist. I clicked over to his Facebook. More of the same. photos with friends at bars, vacation selfies, check-ins at expensive venues. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. A post from 2 months ago. Finally getting my finances in order. Time to invest in my future. Wealth building, investment goals. The comments were congratulatory. Friends saying things like, "About time, man," and "You deserve it after all your hard work." But I was staring at the hashtags, the emojis, the casual announcement that he was suddenly flush with cash. Where had that money come from? Derek worked as a warehouse supervisor. I'd looked up the average salary for that position, maybe $45,000 a year. Enough to live on, but not enough for BMWs and Vegas trips and designer clothes. Not unless he had another source of income. My phone rang. Isabel. "Okay." I looked, she said without preamble. "Barbara Lowry is registered with County Medical. She was diagnosed with moderate to severe dementia 3 years ago. According to her records, she's supposed to be receiving in-home nursing care 3 times a week and attending a day program for dementia patients. But she hasn't been to the day program in over a year, and the in-home nursing notes show she's only been seen twice in the past 6 months. The nurses reported concerns about neglect both times, inadequate food in the house, medication not being administered properly, unsanitary conditions. Did anyone follow up? There's a note that Adult Protective Services was contacted. But the case was closed after a home visit where the son, that's Derek, assured them he had everything under control and showed them recent receipts for her medications and care supplies. He lied, I said flatly. Probably. But it's hard to prove. If he showed them receipts and the house looked okay during the visit, APS doesn't have the resources to keep investigating unless there's clear evidence of abuse. What about her money? Her finances? I can't access that without proper authorization. Why? What are you thinking? I told her everything. About Ethan sneaking out. About finding him at Derek's house. Caring for Barbara at 2 a.m. About Derek's expensive lifestyle, despite supposedly being overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. Miriam, if what you're thinking is true, if Derek is stealing from his mother while neglecting her care, that's elder abuse. Financial exploitation. That's serious. I know. But you can't accuse him without proof. Real proof. Bank records, documentation, something concrete. So what do? You need to talk to Ethan first. Find out exactly what's been going on. How this started. What Derek's been telling him. She was right. But the thought of confronting my son, of admitting I'd followed him, made my stomach clench. And Miriam, be careful. If Derek is doing what you think he's doing, and if he realizes someone's onto him, he could be dangerous. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to plan my next move. I needed to talk to Ethan, but I needed to do it in a way that wouldn't make him shut down. Wouldn't make him defensive. I needed information. The truth. All of it. That evening, I made Ethan's favorite dinner, chicken parmesan with garlic bread and Caesar salad. Comfort food, the kind of meal that said I love you without words. He came home at his usual time, dropped his backpack, headed straight for his room. "Ethan, dinner's ready," I called. "Come eat with me," he emerged looking wary. "I have a lot of homework, 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Sit with your mom and eat dinner." He couldn't refuse without being obviously suspicious. So he sat. We ate in silence for a few minutes. I watched him pick at his food, his exhaustion evident in every movement. "Ethan," I said gently, "I need to talk to you about something." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "About what?" "About why you're so tired lately. About the phone calls. About where you've been going at night." He went very still. "Mom, I don't know what—" "I followed you last night. I know you went to Derek Lowry's house. I know you've been helping take care of Barbara." The color drained from his face. For a moment I thought he might deny it. But then his shoulders sagged, and he looked more exhausted than ever. "How long have you known?" "Since last night." "Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a long time, pushing food around his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I knew you'd make me stop." "Why would I make you stop helping someone who needs help?" "Because Derek said you would. He said parents don't understand. That they think taking care of old people is depressing or dangerous or a waste of time." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "But Mom, she really needs help. Barbara is so confused, so scared at night. And Derek has to work. He doesn't have a choice. If I don't help, she'll be alone." The way he said it, the conviction, the compassion, made my heart ache. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning. How did this start?" And slowly, haltingly, my son told me the story. Ethan's story came out slowly, between bites of food he didn't really eat. It had started 6 weeks ago, he told me. He'd been walking home from school when he heard someone calling for help. He followed the sound to Derek Lowry's front yard and found Barbara standing in the driveway in her nightgown, crying, completely confused about where she was. She kept saying she needed to go home, Ethan said. She didn't recognize her own house. She was so scared, Mom, just standing there in the cold, shaking. He'd helped her inside, called Derek at work. Derek had rushed home, grateful and apologetic, explaining that his mother's dementia was getting worse, that she wandered sometimes, that he was doing his best, but working nights made it impossible to watch her constantly. He seemed like he was really struggling, Ethan continued. He said he couldn't afford to quit his job, but he couldn't afford full-time care either. He was just trying to make it work. "So he asked you to help?" "Not at first. That day he just thanked me and said he'd figure something out. But then a week later he knocked on our door, said Barbara had been asking for me, said I'd made her feel safe. He asked if maybe I could stop by sometimes after school, just to sit with her for an hour or two while he ran errands or slept before his night shift. I felt my jaw tighten. "And you said yes?" I didn't see why not. It seemed like a nice thing to do. "She's lonely, Mom. She doesn't have anyone except Derek, and he's working all the time." "When did it turn into overnight shifts?" Ethan looked down at his plate. "About 3 weeks ago. Derek said his supervisor changed his schedule. Now he has to work 10-hour shifts instead of 8. He said if Barbara woke up alone at night, she'd panic. She'd try to leave the house, or she'd hurt herself looking for him. So he asked you to stay overnight. He offered to pay me $50 a night. But I told him I didn't want money. I just wanted to help, of course he did. My kind, generous son who volunteered at animal shelters and helped elderly neighbors. Of course he'd refused money to help someone in need. How many nights a week? 4. Sunday through Wednesday. He's off work Thursdays through Saturday, 4 nights a week. That explained the exhaustion, the slipping grades, the dark circles under his eyes. "Ethan, why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because Derek said you wouldn't understand. He said most people think dementia patients are creepy or depressing, that they don't want to deal with old people. He said if I told you, you'd make me stop. And then Barbara would have no one." I took a slow breath, trying to control my anger, not at Ethan, but at Derek. At the way he'd manipulated my son's kindness. "And you believed him." I didn't want to risk it. "What if you did make me stop? What would happen to Barbara?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, listen to me. I would never stop you from helping someone who genuinely needs help. But there's something about this situation that doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "Derek drives a brand new BMW. He wears expensive clothes and watches. He posts on social media about trips to Vegas and fancy restaurants. Does that sound like someone who can't afford proper care for his mother?" Ethan frowned. "Maybe he's just good with money. Maybe he saves up for those things. On a warehouse supervisor's salary? While supposedly paying for his mother's medications and care supplies." I squeezed his hand. "Honey, I think Derek's been lying to you. I think he can afford proper care. He just doesn't want to pay for it. But why would he lie? What's the point?" That was the question I couldn't answer yet. But I had suspicions. Dark, terrible suspicions that made me feel sick. I don't know. But I'm going to find out. In the meantime, I need you to promise me something. "What?" "If Derek calls you tonight, if he asks you to come over, you tell him no. You tell him you're sick, or you have too much homework, or whatever excuse you need. But you don't go back to that house until I figure out what's really going on. Mom, please, Ethan. Trust me on this. Something isn't right, and until I know what it is, I need you to stay away." He looked torn, worried about Barbara, but finally nodded. "Okay, but if she needs help, if something happens to her because I'm not there, then that's on Derek, not you. You're 17 years old. You're not responsible for his mother's care." "He is." After dinner, Ethan went to his room to do homework. I waited until I heard his door close, then pulled out my laptop and started digging deeper. I needed financial information. Bank records. Something that would prove Derek was stealing from his mother. But I couldn't just call up his bank and ask for his records. I wasn't law enforcement. I wasn't a lawyer. I was just a concerned neighbor with a suspicious mind, so I did what any modern person does when they need information. I started with public records. Barbara Lowry's husband had died 5 years ago. I found his obituary online. James Lowry, age 73, survived by his wife Barbara and son Derek. Services held at Riverside Funeral Home. I searched for property records next. The house Derek and Barbara lived in was titled in Barbara's name. It had been purchased in 1985 for $89,000 and was now worth approximately $425,000, according to current market assessments. So Barbara owned valuable property. That was one asset Derek could potentially access. I searched for James Lowry's will, but probate records weren't easily accessible online. I'd need to go to the courthouse for that. But I did find something else. A marriage record from 1968. James and Barbara Lowry, married in this county, both 21 years old at the time. They'd been married for 45 years before James died. That was a lifetime together. And now Barbara had dementia and was being left alone at night with a teenager while her son went out and spent money on luxury items. The more I learned, the angrier I became. I called Isabel again. "I need another favor. I'm starting to think I should charge you consulting fees," she said, but her tone was warm. "What now? You know anyone at banks? Someone who might be willing to look at unusual account activity if they suspected elder abuse?" "Miriam, that's getting into legally questionable territory." "I know. But if Derek is stealing from his mother, someone needs to stop him," she sighed. "Let me make some calls, but I'm not promising anything." While I waited, I did more social media stalking. I went back through 3 years of Derek's posts, looking for patterns. What I found was interesting. 3 years ago, Derek's posts were completely different. Photos of him at work, complaints about his job, posts about being tired, being broke, struggling to make ends meet. Then about 2.5 years ago, everything changed. Suddenly, there were posts about finally catching a break, about investments paying off, about treating himself because he deserved it. 2.5 years ago, right around the time Barbara's dementia would have been getting bad enough that she couldn't manage her own finances anymore. I screenshot every post, every photo, every comment that showed Derek's changing financial situation. Then I started looking at Barbara's social media. She had a Facebook account, though it hadn't been updated in 3 years. The last post was from right before her husband died, a photo of them together at a restaurant, Barbara smiling at the camera, looking healthy and happy. Her friends had commented on that post even after it was clear she wasn't responding anymore. Messages asking how she was doing, saying they missed her at church, asking if she needed anything, and then about a year ago, those messages stopped, as if her friends had given up on hearing from her. I clicked through her friends list. Most were women her age, probably from church or community groups. I recognized a few names from the neighborhood. One name stood out, Margaret Chen, who lived 2 streets over. I'd met Margaret a few times at neighborhood events. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and known for being direct to the point of bluntness. I found Margaret's number in the neighborhood directory and called before I could second-guess myself. "Hello? Hi, Margaret. This is Miriam Ashford. We've met a few times at neighborhood association meetings." "Oh yes, I remember you. You have the teenage son. Nice boy. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask you about Barbara Lowry. I saw on Facebook that you're friends with her." There was a pause. I was friends with Barbara before she got sick. "Why are you asking?" "My son has been helping Derek care for her. But I'm concerned about some things I've noticed. I was wondering if you could tell me what Barbara was like before the dementia, what her situation was." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you asking me this as a concerned neighbor or for some other reason?" I decided honesty was the best approach. "I'm asking because I think Derek might not be taking proper care of her. And I'm trying to figure out if I'm just being paranoid or if there's something really wrong." "Come over," Margaret said abruptly. "Right now. We should talk in person." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Margaret Chen's living room, drinking tea and listening to her tell me about Barbara Lowry. "Barbara and I were close," Margaret began. "We met at church 30 years ago. Our husbands were friends. We went to the same book club, volunteered together at the food bank. She was one of my dearest friends. What happened? James got sick, pancreatic cancer. It was fast, 6 months from diagnosis to death. During that time, Barbara started showing signs of memory problems. At first, we thought it was just the stress of losing James, but after he died, it got worse." "When did Derek move in with her?" "About a year after James died. Barbara was still living alone, but she was starting to have trouble managing things. Bills weren't getting paid. She'd forget to eat. Neighbors would find her wandering, confused about where she lived. So Derek stepped in. Yes, we were all relieved. He was her only child. It seemed like the right thing for him to do. Barbara had always been proud of him, always talked about how successful he was going to be. Something in Margaret's tone made me pay attention. But Derek had never been particularly close with his parents. He'd moved across the country after college, only came home for holidays. When James got sick, Derek visited twice in 6 months. Barbara made excuses for him, said he was busy with work, couldn't get time off. So why did he come back after James died? Margaret looked at me steadily. Initially I thought it was guilt, or maybe he'd finally realized his mother needed him. But now, she shook her head. Now I wonder if it was the money. What money? James was careful with finances his whole life. He had a good pension from the power company. They'd paid off the house. He had savings, investments. When he died, all of it went to Barbara. I don't know the exact amount, but it was substantial. Enough that Barbara should never have had to worry about money again. My heart was pounding. How much is substantial? Barbara mentioned once that James had left her very comfortable. She said she could afford whatever care she needed. That was before the dementia got bad, of course. Before Derek took over managing everything. Did she have a lawyer? Someone who set up her estate? Yes, Robert Singh. He's semi-retired now, but his office is still downtown. He handled James's will and helped Barbara set up her finances after James died. I wrote down the name. Do you still see Barbara? Have you visited her? Margaret's expression darkened. I tried. For the first year after Derek moved in, I'd visit regularly. But then Derek started making it difficult. He'd say Barbara was sleeping, or having a bad day, or that visitors upset her. Eventually, he told me outright that Barbara didn't want visitors anymore, that it confused her too much. Did you believe him? No, but what could I do? He's her son. He has legal authority over her care. I couldn't force my way in. I tried calling Adult Protective Services, but they did a home visit and said everything looked fine. When was that? About 6 months ago. After I hadn't seen Barbara in almost a year. I was so worried about her. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I still am. I think about her all the time. Wonder if she's okay. If she's being taken care of properly. I reached over and took her hand. My son has been staying with her at night while Derek works. He says she's confused and frightened. But he also says Derek seems like he's struggling, trying his best. Your son sounds like a good kid. But if he thinks Derek is struggling, he's wrong. Or Derek is lying to him. That's what I'm afraid of. Margaret stood up and went to a desk in the corner. She pulled out a folder and brought it back to me. These are printouts of emails Barbara sent me before the dementia got too bad. Before Derek took over her computer access. Read them. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails dated from 3 years ago, right after James died. Margaret, I don't know what to do. Derek keeps asking about James's life insurance, about the investments. He says he wants to help me manage everything, but I'm not ready to give up control yet. Am I being paranoid? Derek took me to the bank today. He said I should add him to all my accounts so he can help if I need it. The banker looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I signed the papers. Was that a mistake? I tried to go to lunch with the book club, but Derek said he needed the car. He's been using it a lot lately, says his broke down. But I saw his car in the driveway yesterday. I'm so confused I can't find my checkbook. Derek says he put it somewhere safe, but I'm worried. What if I need it? The emails became shorter, less coherent as time went on. The last one was dated 2 years ago. Margaret, I'm scared. I can't remember things anymore. Derek is taking care of everything now. He says not to worry, but I'm scared. I looked up at Margaret, my throat tight. Did you show these to anyone? I showed them to Adult Protective Services when I made the report. They said without evidence of actual abuse or theft, there wasn't much they could do. That family members are often given financial power of attorney for elderly relatives, and that's legal and normal. But this doesn't feel normal. No, Margaret agreed. It doesn't. I left Margaret's house with the folder of emails, a new determination burning in my chest. Derek Lowry wasn't a struggling son trying to care for his sick mother. He was a thief. I was sure of it now, but being sure and being able to prove it were two different things. I needed help. Professional help. The next morning, I called Robert Singh's law office. His secretary said he was semi-retired, but still took occasional consultations. Could I come in tomorrow? I said yes. That evening, Ethan came home from school looking anxious. Derek called me during lunch. He asked why I wasn't answering his texts. I told him I was sick. What did he say? He said Barbara had a rough day, that she kept asking for me. He made me feel terrible, Mom. That was manipulation, pure and simple. Using guilt to control my son. You're not responsible for her care, I reminded him. Derek is. But what if something happens to her because I'm not there? Then that's on Derek, not you. But I could see Ethan wasn't convinced. And I knew that if I didn't do something soon, Derek would wear him down. And my son would go back to sacrificing his sleep, his health, his future to cover for a man who was almost certainly committing a crime. I had to move faster. The next afternoon, I sat in Robert Singh's office. A wood-paneled room that smelled like old books and furniture polish. Robert Singh was in his early 70s. With silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything. About Ethan, about Barbara, about Derek's expensive lifestyle and suspicious social media posts. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You understand that I can't share details about Barbara's financial arrangements without her consent or a court order, he said finally. I understand. But can you tell me if there's cause for concern? If someone should be investigating? He studied me. I can tell you this. When James Lowry died, he left Barbara very well provided for. Between life insurance, savings, investments, and the house, she had assets worth over $700,000. I felt my breath catch. That was a fortune. I helped Barbara set up a trust to protect those assets, Robert continued. I also strongly advised her not to give Derek power of attorney over her finances until absolutely necessary. I suggested she work with a neutral third-party fiduciary instead. Did she take your advice? For about 6 months. Then Derek convinced her to name him as power of attorney. He said having a stranger manage her money was insulting, that he was her son and should be trusted. Robert's expression was grim. I tried to talk her out of it, but she signed the papers. There was nothing I could do. So Derek has complete control over her finances. Yes, and once someone has power of attorney, it's very difficult to prove they're misusing it unless there's clear evidence of theft or fraud. How would we get that evidence? Bank records, documentation of expenses, proof that he's spending her money on himself rather than her care. He paused. Or testimony from someone who's witnessed the neglect firsthand. My son could testify. He's seen the conditions she's living in. That would help. But you'd need more. Financial documentation. A forensic accountant to review the spending patterns. How do I get access to her bank records? You don't. Only law enforcement or adult protective services can subpoena those records. You'd need to file a formal complaint and get them to open an investigation. I tried that. Margaret Chen tried that. They did a home visit and closed the case. Robert nodded slowly. Then you need to give them something they can't ignore. Multiple witnesses, documentation of neglect, evidence that makes it impossible for them to walk away. He pulled out a business card and wrote a number on the back. This is Detective Ryan Walsh with the County Financial Crimes Unit. He specializes in elder financial abuse cases. Tell him I sent you. Tell him everything you've told me. He'll know what to do. I took the card with shaking hands. Thank you. Mrs. Ashford, if what you suspect is true, you're potentially saving Barbara Lowry's life. And you're teaching your son an important lesson, that standing up for vulnerable people is more important than being polite or non-confrontational. I left his office with a sense of purpose. That evening, I called Detective Walsh. I laid out everything, Ethan's involvement, Derek's lifestyle, Margaret's concerns, Robert Singh's warnings. He listened carefully, asking occasional questions. I can't open an official investigation without more concrete evidence, he said finally. But I can do some preliminary checking. See if there are any red flags in Barbara's financial records. If I find something concerning, I can pass it to Adult Protective Services and recommend they take another look. How long will that take? A few days? Maybe a week. I need to be careful. If Derek suspects he's being investigated, he might move money or destroy evidence. What do I do in the meantime? Keep your son away from that house. Document anything suspicious you observe. And if you see Barbara in distress or danger, call 911 immediately. After we hung up, I felt both relieved and terrified. The wheels were in motion. But what would Derek do when he realized someone was onto him? And more importantly, What would happen to Barbara if Derek decided to cut his losses and run? That night, Derek called Ethan again. I heard my son's phone ringing at 9 p.m., saw Derek's name on the screen. Ethan looked at me, uncertain. "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker," he did. "Ethan, hey, listen, I really need your help tonight." Derek's voice sounded stressed, urgent. "Barbara's having a really bad night. She's crying for you." "I don't know what to do. I told you I'm sick." "Please, buddy. I know you're not feeling great, but this is an emergency." She won't calm down. She keeps asking where you are. It's breaking my heart. I could see Ethan weakening, see the guilt working on him. I took the phone from his hand. "Derek, this is Miriam Ashford, Ethan's mother." Silence. Then, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Ashford. Ethan won't be coming over tonight. Or any other night. If your mother needs overnight care, you need to hire a professional caregiver. Using a 17-year-old is inappropriate and possibly illegal." I was just trying to give Ethan some responsibility. Help him build his resume for college applications by having him provide unsupervised care for a dementia patient. "That's not resume building, Derek. That's exploitation." His voice hardened. "I don't know what Ethan's been telling you, but my relationship with my mother is none of your business. It became my business when you involved my minor child." "Don't call this number again." I hung up before he could respond. Ethan was staring at me with wide eyes. "Mom, what if Barbara really does need help?" "Then Derek needs to call 911 or hire proper care. That's not your responsibility." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of worry settle over me. Because if Derek was stealing from his mother, if he was neglecting her care, what would he do now that he knew someone was paying attention? Would he step up and get her proper help? Or would he do something desperate? I didn't know. But I was about to find out. Detective Ryan Walsh called me back 3 days later. "Mrs. Ashford, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station?" My heart jumped. "Did you find something?" "Yes. And it's worse than you thought." An hour later, I sat across from Detective Walsh in a small conference room at the county sheriff's office. He was in his early 50s with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty. He spread out several documents on the table between us. Barbara Lowry had $723,000 in assets when her husband died 5 years ago, he began. Life insurance, retirement savings, investment accounts, and the house. Her husband set everything up carefully to make sure she'd be taken care of for the rest of her life. Had? I caught the past tense. As of last week, Barbara Lowry has $34,000 left. Everything else is gone. The room seemed to tilt. Gone where? Spent? Withdrawn? Transferred? Derek Lowry has been systematically draining his mother's accounts for the past 2.5 years. He pulled out bank statements covered in yellow highlighter. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to his personal accounts, credit card payments, car payments. He slid over another document. This is the loan paperwork for Derek's BMW, paid for with a $58,000 cashier's check from Barbara's savings account. This is the receipt for a Rolex watch, $12,000 charged to Barbara's credit card. These are casino receipts from Vegas, $23,000 in charges over one weekend, all on Barbara's card. I stared at the papers, feeling sick. He's been stealing from her, systematically. And he's been clever about it. Small withdrawals at first, a few thousand here and there, then larger amounts as he got bolder. He'd write himself checks, sign her name, deposit them into his account. He charged his rent, his utilities, his lifestyle expenses all to her credit cards. How is this possible? Didn't anyone at the bank notice? He has power of attorney. Legally, he's allowed to access her accounts. Banks don't question those transactions unless someone files a complaint. And if anyone did question him, he'd say he was managing his mother's care expenses. But he wasn't paying for her care. No, he wasn't. Detective Walsh pulled out another stack of papers. These are the bills for Barbara's medications. Most haven't been filled in over a year. This is the invoice from the Memory Care Day program she was supposed to attend. Derek canceled it 18 months ago and pocketed the refund. These are the canceled checks for her in-home nursing care, stopped being paid 2 years ago. So she's been getting no medical care at all? Almost none. An occasional doctor's visit when he couldn't avoid it. But no ongoing treatment, no therapy, no support services, nothing that costs money, while he spent her money on cars and watches and Vegas trips. Exactly. Detective Walsh's expression was grim. This is textbook elder financial abuse. One of the worst cases I've seen, actually. Most people who steal from elderly relatives at least maintain basic care. Derek didn't even do that. What about the receipts he showed Adult Protective Services? The ones that made them close the case? Fabricated, or old receipts he'd saved from months earlier. It's not hard to fake documentation if you know what you're doing. I thought about my son, spending his nights caring for a woman whose own son was robbing her blind. What happens now? Now I present this evidence to the district attorney. We'll file charges: elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, possibly more. We'll also contact Adult Protective Services and get an emergency order to remove Barbara from Derek's custody and place her in proper care. When? Tomorrow morning. We'll execute a search warrant on Derek's house, seize his financial records, and arrest him. We'll also remove Barbara and place her in a secure memory care facility where she can get proper treatment. Relief flooded through me. Thank God. Mrs. Ashford, I need to prepare you for something. When we remove Barbara from that house, we're probably going to find conditions that are worse than you've seen. Neglect cases like this, when we finally get inside, it's usually bad. Are you okay with your son potentially being called as a witness? He may need to testify about what he saw. Whatever it takes. Ethan will do what's right. Good. Because his testimony is going to be crucial. He's the only person besides Derek who's been inside that house regularly. He can describe Barbara's condition, the living environment, Derek's behavior. That eyewitness testimony from someone with no motive to lie will be very powerful. I nodded, my throat tight. He'll do it. I'll make sure he understands why it's important. Detective Walsh gathered up his papers. One more thing. Don't contact Derek. Don't let Ethan contact him. Don't do anything that might tip him off. If he suspects we're on to him, he might try to move money, destroy evidence, or worse, hurt Barbara to cover his tracks. You think he'd hurt his own mother? People who steal from vulnerable family members are capable of anything. We've seen cases where the abuser kills the victim rather than face prosecution. I'm not saying that's what Derek would do, but we can't take the chance. That night, I sat Ethan down and told him everything. About the investigation, about the money, about Derek's lies. My son's face went through a journey of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a deep, terrible guilt. He used me, Ethan whispered. He used me to cover up what he was doing to her. Yes, all those nights I was there, thinking I was helping. I was actually making it easier for him to steal from her. Neighbors saw me coming and going. They thought someone was taking care of her. They didn't call for help because of me. You didn't know. You were trying to do something good. Derek manipulated your kindness. But Barbara, his voice cracked. She was so scared, Mom, so confused. And I thought it was just the dementia. But what if she was scared because she knew something was wrong? What if she knew Derek was hurting her, but she couldn't articulate it? I pulled my son into a hug. Tomorrow the police are going to help her. They're going to arrest Derek and get Barbara proper care. And you're going to help make sure he's held accountable. Detective Walsh wants you to testify about what you saw. Ethan pulled back, wiping his eyes. I'll tell them everything, every detail. He needs to pay for what he did to her. He will. I promise you he will. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Barbara, alone in that house with a son who saw her as nothing but a source of money. Kept thinking about all the red flags I should have noticed earlier. Kept thinking about how close we'd come to just accepting Derek's story and never questioning it. The next morning, I made Ethan stay home from school. Detective Walsh had said we could observe from a distance when they executed the warrant, and I wanted Ethan to see that justice was being done. At 8 a.m., we parked 2 houses down from Derek's home and watched as 3 police cars pulled up. Detective Walsh got out of one, along with 2 uniformed officers. A woman in a business suit, from Adult Protective Services, I assumed, emerged from an unmarked car. They knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. Finally, the door opened. Derek stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep. Even from this distance, I could see his expression change from confusion to fear as Detective Walsh showed him the warrant and badge. The officers entered the house. Derek was gesturing, arguing, but he was outnumbered. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs, being led to a patrol car. As they put him in the back seat, Derek's eyes swept the street. For a moment, his gaze landed on our car. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the hatred in his expression. He knew. He knew we were responsible for this. Good. Let him know. More officers emerged from the house carrying boxes. evidence, files, Derek's computer. The woman from APS came out supporting a small, frail figure in a nightgown. Barbara. Even from a distance, I could see how thin she was. How she moved uncertainly, frightened by all the strangers, the commotion. The APS worker was speaking to her gently, helping her into a van. Ethan was crying silently beside me. She looks so small. She's going somewhere safe now. Somewhere, people will actually take care of her. We watched as the van pulled away, taking Barbara to what would hopefully be a better life. Then the police cars left, Derek in custody. It was over. At least this part. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Derek was charged with 7 counts of elder financial abuse, 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of criminal neglect. Bail was set at $250,000, money he didn't have, since most of what he'd stolen had already been spent, so he sat in jail while his case moved through the system. Ethan gave his testimony to the prosecutor, hours of detailed descriptions of Barbara's living conditions, her confusion and fear, Derek's absence, the lack of food and medication in the house. The prosecutor said his testimony was compelling and credible. I testified too, about following Ethan, about what I'd observed, about my investigation that led to Detective Walsh. Margaret Chen testified about Barbara's emails and the systematic isolation Derek had imposed. Robert Singh testified about Barbara's substantial assets and his warnings to her about giving Derek power of attorney. A forensic accountant testified about the spending patterns, the fraudulent signatures, the brazen theft. And Detective Walsh testified about finding Barbara living in squalor, dirty clothes, no food in the house, expired medications, bruises from falls that hadn't been treated. The defense tried to argue that Derek was overwhelmed, that he'd made mistakes but hadn't meant harm, that he'd been using his mother's money for household expenses, which technically benefited her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was harsh. Mr. Lowry, you stole from the woman who gave you life. You neglected her care while spending her money on luxuries. You manipulated a teenage boy into covering for your abuse. You showed no remorse, no concern for your mother's well-being. This was calculated, systematic exploitation of a vulnerable person who trusted you. 8 years in prison. Plus restitution of every penny he'd stolen. Money he'd never be able to pay back since he'd already spent it. Derek was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back, didn't show any emotion, just walked out of the courtroom like he was leaving a business meeting. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, Margaret Chen hugged me tightly. Thank you. Thank you for not looking away, for not accepting the easy explanation. I had to. For Barbara, for Ethan, how is he doing? I looked over at my son, who was talking quietly with the prosecutor. He's struggling. He feels guilty for not seeing what was happening sooner, for being used. He was doing what he thought was right. That's all any of us can do. She was right. But I knew it would take time for Ethan to forgive himself. 3 weeks after the trial, I took Ethan to visit Barbara at Riverside Memory Care Facility. The difference was stunning. Barbara had gained weight. Her hair was clean and neatly styled. She wore comfortable clothes that fit properly. She was sitting in a sunny common room, working on a puzzle with a nurse's aide. Barbara, the aide said gently. You have visitors. Barbara looked up. Her eyes were still confused, still lost in the fog of dementia. But when she saw Ethan, something flickered in her expression. Do I know you? She asked. I'm Ethan. I used to visit you sometimes. She studied his face. You were kind to me. When I was scared, you held my hand. I did. Thank you for that. She smiled, and for just a moment, I saw the woman she must have been before the disease took her. It's nice when people are kind. We stayed for 20 minutes. Barbara didn't remember much, couldn't hold a conversation, would forget what she'd said minutes before, but she seemed content, safe. The nurses said she was doing well, that with proper medication and care, some of her symptoms had improved. As we left, Ethan was quiet. She didn't remember me, he finally said as we got in the car. She remembered that you were kind. That's what mattered to her. Do you think she knows what Derek did? Does she understand why he's not there anymore? I don't know. I hope not. I hope she just remembers the good parts of her life. Her husband, her friends, the times before she got sick. We drove in silence for a while. Then Ethan spoke again. "Mom, I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life." "What about it?" "I still want to go into medicine. But not just to be a doctor. I want to specialize in geriatrics, in caring for elderly patients, because there are so many people like Barbara out there. People who are vulnerable and alone and being taken advantage of. I want to help them." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Your dad would be so proud of you." "You think so?" "I know so. You took something terrible and turned it into purpose. That's not easy. That takes real strength." 6 months later, life had found a new normal. Ethan was thriving in his senior year. His grades had recovered. He'd been accepted to every college he applied to, with several offering scholarships. He'd chosen the state university's pre-med program, with a focus on geriatric medicine. He still volunteered, not providing overnight care, but legitimate volunteer work at a local nursing home, visiting residents who didn't have family, playing board games, reading to them. Doing it the right way, through an official program with proper supervision and boundaries. I was proud of him. So incredibly proud. As for me, I'd learned some hard lessons too. I'd learned that kindness can be manipulated, that good intentions aren't always enough, that sometimes helping someone means asking hard questions and challenging easy explanations. I'd also learned that silence enables abuse, that looking away is a choice, that standing up for vulnerable people isn't optional. It's a responsibility we all share. Derek was in prison where he belonged. Barbara was in proper care, finally receiving the treatment and dignity she deserved. And my son had learned that doing the right thing sometimes means being willing to speak uncomfortable truths. One evening, as Ethan and I were having dinner together, a rare occurrence now that he was busy with school and volunteering, he looked at me thoughtfully. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you followed me that night, when you saw what was happening, why didn't you just make me stop? Why did you investigate instead?" I considered the question. "Because I trusted you. I knew you wouldn't be doing something that looked that strange unless you had a good reason. So I needed to understand the situation before I made you stop. And once I understood, I needed to fix the real problem, not just the symptom." "What do you mean?" "The symptom was you being exhausted and your grades slipping. The real problem was Derek exploiting his mother and manipulating you into covering for him. If I just made you stop helping without addressing the real problem, Barbara would still be suffering and Derek would still be stealing from her. Maybe he would have found some other teenager to manipulate, or maybe Barbara would have died alone. Fixing the symptom wouldn't have helped anyone." Ethan nodded slowly. "That makes sense. It's like in medicine. You don't just treat the symptoms. You have to find the underlying cause." "Exactly. I'm glad you didn't just make me stop. I'm glad you investigated, even though it was hard. Even though finding out I'd been used felt terrible." He paused. "Barbara's safe now because you didn't take the easy way out. We're both responsible for that. You're the one who was brave enough to testify, to stand up in court and tell the truth, knowing it would be difficult." "I had to. For her." We finished dinner, and as Ethan cleared the dishes, I thought about everything that had happened. About the night I'd followed my son in the dark. About the investigation that had uncovered such terrible abuse. About the trial and the testimony, and the justice that had finally been served. It had been exhausting, difficult, sometimes frightening, but it had been necessary, and it had taught both of us something crucial. That standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves isn't always easy or comfortable or simple, but it's always right. A year later, I received a letter forwarded through Detective Walsh. It was from Barbara's estate attorney, a different one. Not Robert Singh, but someone appointed by the court to manage what was left of her assets. "Dear Mrs. Ashford, I'm writing to inform you that Barbara Lowry passed away peacefully in her sleep last week. While her dementia had progressed significantly, she was comfortable and well cared for at Riverside Memory Care until the end. Before she lost the ability to communicate clearly, Barbara was able to express to the staff at Riverside that she was grateful for the people who had helped her. While she couldn't remember names or specific details, she retained the emotional memory of kindness shown to her during her most vulnerable time. As executor of her estate, I wanted you to know that the remaining $34,000 in Barbara's accounts, along with the proceeds from the sale of her house, Derek's conviction voided his inheritance rights, have been designated per her original will to establish a trust fund. The Barbara Lowry Trust for Elder Care Advocacy will provide grants to organizations that fight elder abuse and support vulnerable seniors. In a very real sense, the horror Barbara experienced in the final years of her life will now help protect others from similar abuse. That feels like the right kind of legacy. Thank you for your role in ensuring Barbara's final year was spent in safety and dignity rather than continued exploitation. I read the letter to Ethan that evening. He cried. Not from sadness exactly, but from a complicated mix of emotions I understood completely. She's at peace now, I told him. And because of what happened, other people will be protected. That matters. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner. Maybe she would have had more time being properly cared for. You can't think like that. You did figure it out. By being there, by being consistent, you created the pattern that let me see something was wrong. Without you, I never would have investigated. Barbara might have died alone in that house with no one knowing what had happened to her. I guess, Ethan, you were 17 years old. You saw someone in need and you helped. That was the right instinct. And when you found out the situation was more complicated than you thought, you did the hard thing. You testified, even though it was uncomfortable. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for herself. That's what heroes do, he smiled slightly. I'm not a hero, Mom. Yes, you are. Maybe not the kind with a cape and superpowers, but the real kind, the kind who does the right thing even when it's hard. 2 years later, Ethan was in his sophomore year of college, excelling in his pre-med program. He'd declared his focus on geriatric medicine, and he volunteered regularly with elder advocacy groups. He told people the story sometimes about how he'd been manipulated into covering for elder abuse, about how his mother had investigated and exposed the crime, about how the experience had shaped his career path, and people would ask him, "Do you regret getting involved? Do you wish you'd never helped Barbara in the first place?" His answer was always the same. I regret that I didn't see what was really happening sooner, but I don't regret trying to help. Helping people is never wrong. Being used doesn't mean you should stop being kind. It just means you should be smarter about how you help. As for me, I became an advocate too. I started speaking at community centers and senior groups about the warning signs of elder financial abuse, about how to protect yourself, about how to spot manipulation, about why it's important to investigate when something doesn't add up, even if it means asking uncomfortable questions. I always ended my presentations the same way. If you see someone who seems to be in trouble, don't look away. Don't accept easy explanations. Trust your instincts. Ask questions. Because the most vulnerable people in our society depend on the rest of us to pay attention, to care, to act. My 17-year-old son tried to help a woman in need. He was exploited for his kindness. But his willingness to speak up ultimately saved that woman's life and put a criminal in prison. And it taught both of us that doing the right thing isn't always simple or straightforward. Sometimes it means investigating. Sometimes it means confronting uncomfortable truths. Sometimes it means standing up in court and testifying even when it's frightening. But it's always worth it, because every vulnerable person deserves someone who will fight for them, someone who will pay attention, someone who will care, be that someone. For the elderly neighbor who seems isolated, for the person who seems to be in a situation that doesn't quite make sense, for anyone who needs an advocate but can't advocate for themselves. Pay attention, ask questions, don't look away. That's how we protect the vulnerable. That's how we stop abuse. That's how we create a society where people like Derek can't exploit people like Barbara. One investigation at a time, one testimony at a time, one act of courage at a time. And every time I gave that speech, I thought about the night I followed my son into the darkness, about the investigation that followed, about the justice that was served, about how one person paying attention can change everything, about how the hardest thing and the right thing are often the same thing, and about how my son, at 17, had inadvertently taught me the most important lesson of all, that kindness without awareness can be dangerous. But awareness without action is worthless. You need both. Compassion and courage, kindness and wisdom. That's what it takes to protect the vulnerable. That's what it takes to make a difference. And that's a lesson worth learning, no matter how painful the teaching. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that uncover the hidden truths of everyday life. There are so many more untold stories waiting to be revealed. Thank you for being here. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in their place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them with me in the comments below. On the screen, you can see 2 more life stories I strongly recommend. There are many more waiting on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.